Mardu Death Shadow versus Izzet Phoenix. Very curious how this matchup is going to play out. You think Mardu Death Shadow was built with 2 decks in mind, Hogak, Izzet Phoenix. That points to the Path being the correct removal spell over Lightning Bolt. It points to having this kind of grindy long game that you can use against Phoenix's transformational plans. So maybe Mardu Death Shadow has the tools required to compete here.
Yeah, and I expect the games to play out with some early disruption on the Death Shadow side. You want to hit him with some discard, potentially get the Dreadhorde Arcanist on the board to compound your card advantage there. On the flip side, we see it over and over. The Izzet Phoenix deck, a couple of early turns setting up, and then they just start doing pretty unfair things after that. Yeah,
and as we've talked about, 4 main deck graveyard hate spells for the Mardu Death Shadow list. 2 Nile Spellbombs, 2 Surgical Extractions. Going pretty hard on that aspect of things. I think they did so because of Hogak, but happy to have that against Izzet Phoenix as well. And just doing some damage to itself is Mardu Death Shadow, playing a bunch of land, cycling Street Wraith, already down to 13, played Dreadhorde Arcanist, but that was met quickly by a Lightning Bolt from Robert Stanley.
Yeah, that's an important one to keep off the battlefield if you can.
Absolutely. No gas in the graveyard yet, but it only takes a couple of Dreadhorde Arcanist activations for things to get very silly. Here's Thing in the Ice from Robert Stanley. Again, another card, Fatal Push. Path to Exile answers very cleanly. Don't have that same Lightning Bolt weakness that many decks hold. Back to Bertarioni's turn.
And part of the appeal of this Mardu Death Shadow deck is its ability to be controlling in the first couple of turns 1 through 4. But when it turns the corner, it actually does it super quick. Playing a Ranger Captain Eos, getting that Death Shadow, it's 3 mana for the one creature, only 1 mana for the other creature. You get the tutor, so you're getting a bunch of card advantage. The Death Shadow is huge after you've cycled some Street Wraiths, you played your Thought Seizes, and so it's very appealing to close out the game quickly after you've controlled the early turns, and this deck does it very effectively.
Absolutely. I want to talk for a second about that Thoughtseize we just saw from Bertarioni, because I think it spoke very well to why we have seen a decrease in discard in the meta over recent times. You saw Bertarioni had the choice of cards in hand, and it just didn't matter.
Yep.
None of those cards were vulnerable to Thoughtseize. There was so much redundancy, so many cards that wanted to be in the graveyard. That's been a huge part of the reason why decks like Green-Black, Jund, Abzan, and even Mardu have scaled off as time has gone on. Discard just not as effective as it has been in the past.
Yeah, there's so many decks that take advantage of their graveyard or just have super redundant cards in their hand that the discard is not as effective a path of fighting these decks as it used to be.
Correct. Robert Stanley getting back to work here, doing the cantrip thing, cast Sleight of Hand, follow up Serum Visions, Thing in the Ice, ticking down, getting ready to present a very real clock. And there you saw that trump card on the top of Robert Stanley's deck. It's Aria Flame. Jeremy Bertarioni has done a lot of work to get his life total down to 11, to have access to his Death Shadows thus far in the game. Aria Flame undoes all that work and presents a scary, scary kill condition from Izzet Phoenix.
Yeah, the Aria Flame is just so good because, like you said, in this matchup, it's a removal spell against their best threat, which is kind of neat. Just incidentally doing that. It's an enchantment, so it's just so hard to interact with. And as we've noted all weekend long, it doesn't care about the graveyard.
Yep.
You just keep casting all your cantrips the way that you want to, and the Aria Flame just does what it does.
And Robert Stanley looking to get to business here, doesn't want to waste any time. It's Lava Dart, flashback Lava Dart, transform Thing in the Ice. Yeah. But Bertarioni looking to make a response here.
Yeah, I'd be super surprised if he didn't have an answer for it.
And he does. Path to Exile.
He started turn 1, no play. Turn 2, deploy my 1/3. There's got to be something else going on in his hand. He's not just going to have this hand that's not interactive, doesn't have threats, and doesn't have answers.
No, I agree with you. And was prepared with the path there.
It is a little funny, just the way that played out. Stanley really committing to get that flipped Thing in the Ice into an aggressive position, going so far as sacrificing a mountain to do it, and then he just gets the land right back from the Path to Exile.
Well, here's the messed up thing, though, and I guess ultimately it didn't matter. I'm assuming that when Serum Vision was cast, Aria Flame was left on top. I don't know that. I think it's important enough in this matchup that you would leave it on top. But Path to Exile, you're going into your deck. You're going to be shuffling. There goes Aria Flame. It turns out he was going to get Surgical Extraction anyway. Didn't matter. There's going to be shuffling regardless. But I think that's interesting. An interesting decision point. Lightning Bolt going to be removed from Robert Stanley's deck. Makes sense, right? Mardu Death Shadow puts itself at a vulnerable life total. You don't want those burn spells floating around your opponent's deck.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about using that card there. It's possible that the thought process, I have open mana. I don't want to pay life later to do this. Let me get while the getting's good, so to speak.
Maybe.
But on the flip side, I feel like he just burned a card.
Well, maybe thinking he's going to get increased access to it via Dreadhorde Arcanist. Another upside of taking those Lightning Bolts, though. Dreadhorde Arcanist is going to live.
Yeah, so I can see the line here. If he had the Arcanist in his hand already, which he likely did, of just being like, I'm going to protect this card, and then it's going to pay dividends in the future. I don't mind being down a card right now because I'm going to get it all back when I can attack with this Arcanist.
Right, and we know this deck reaches a point pretty much when it casts Ranger Captain of Eos that it just has all the cards in the world. It'll flash back in on Earth, cast another Ranger Captain, and next thing you know, there's a horde of Death Shadows on the battlefield. So we're going to have a hard cast, Arclight Phoenix. It's going to soar across the battlefield, dropping down Jeremy Bertarioni to 5 life. Jeremy wants to take a little bit more damage, though. Going to cash in one of those silent clearings. Takes a draw, down at 4 now. Another draw. Does he have an answer available to the Arclight Phoenix? We know Dreadhorde Arcanist on the battlefield will be able to attack. As long as it dodges a Surgical Extraction, it'll be able to fire off this path. It does do so. Arclight Phoenix going to be exiled. Robert Stanley goes searching for a basic land.
I thought he was going to be a gentleman and just pull out all of the Arclight Phoenixes. But no, it's not the Surgical Extraction.
No.
It's Path to Exile.
Yeah. That would be a very powerful effect if Path to Exile worked that way. Not that it isn't already.
Coming to you in the near future from Wizards of the Coast.
Right. Well, maybe that was just what we needed to fix this metagame. Super Path to Exile.
The Surgical Exile?
Yeah. Love it.
It would be free. Pay 2 life.
That's a scary thought.
Ooh, and look at Jeremy just really being aggressive with his life total here.
Yeah, I agree. But you know why now? It's Ranger Captain of Eos.
Yeah, if you're going to do this, you might as well make Giant Death Shadow and have the ability to just close out the game super quick.
Yeah, he wants to win on the next turn if able to. Let's see, what are we looking at? 15 points of damage just from bodies on the battlefield presently. Has to fear Arclight Phoenix coming off the top of the deck here.
Yep, and that's the only thing he has to fear.
I think so.
I mean, if things start to look too bad at any point, he can just cash in that Ranger Captain.
Right, and I've talked about this spot a few times where the opponent is casting Manamorphose, and I wonder if it's often right to sack Ranger Captain of Eos in this spot. You know you're vulnerable to an Arclight Phoenix. However, opponent hasn't made a land drop for the turn. They could just go land drop, Arclight Phoenix, and you're still dead to it, regardless of Manamorphose here.
Yeah. The Phoenix is kind of a non-factor, right? They're going to get you with that either way.
Yep. Yeah, and opponent isn't mana constrained here. We've seen other times where they tap low to cast Manamorphose. That's when I think you really want to consider cashing in Ranger Captain, so they aren't able to fire off any instants in their hand.
Well, and this is the interesting interaction. If he goes for the finale.
Yeah. Could shut down 2 cantrips here. Again, looking like an attractive spot for this Ranger Captain. Bertarioni doing some reaching. Yeah, making some gesturing.
Yeah, there's a discussion with his teammates.
I think it's go time here. I'm cashing in.
Yeah, I think if you can't kill the opponent next turn anyway.
He says no.
Don't let them draw all of these cards.
He's only got access to 16 damage on the next turn, so that's an interesting call.
Oh, and there's a Phoenix.
Yep, Ben's 2 here. Here comes Phoenix. That's going to do it.
Wow.
I don't know, man. I think you just need to cash in there in the face of the finale.
Yeah, like I was saying, if you can't kill the opponent with the attack the next turn, don't let him look at all of those cards. There's so many free cards that he gets to look at.
I agree. I'll be honest, it could be something I'm missing. I've seen Bertarioni be far more conservative with those Ranger captains than I would be. I'll say that. So he's got something he's working towards. He's got a strategy. Had a reason for not cashing in there. You saw him consider it. You saw him discuss it with his teammate. For whatever reason, they shied away from that decision. But Robert Stanley was able to find the Phoenix and take game 1 against Jeremy Bertarioni. We're going to sideboards now. Why don't we go ahead and take a look at Jeremy's first. There you see 4 Yixlid Jailers, 4 Lingering Souls, 3 Plague Engineers, 1 Shenanigans, 1 Gideon Ally of Zendikar, 1 Grim Lavamancer, and finally 1 Celestial Purge. What do you like out of Jeremy's deck?
I don't like many of these cards at all. So Lingering Souls, you're just asking to get beat up, right, by a flip thing in the ice.
Yep.
I can see the Celestial Purge coming in. You're able to exile a Phoenix. That's pretty good.
Purge is great. Absolutely.
If there's cards you want to take out of your deck, I could see. I don't know. So the Jailer is just like it shuts off Phoenix, but nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I want that card in my deck either. Like we said, he already has some main deck graveyard hate in his deck. He's going to want to keep that in. I can see just adding the Celestial Purge and not really going out on a limb with any of these other cards.
Yeah, I'm curious how Bertarioni is going to approach the matchup, but I agree with you. Not a whole lot of help in the sideboard here. That says to me he's comfortable with his matchup in game 1. He thinks he's favored if he's not going to have a lot of answers for either the best or second best deck in the format.
Sure.
Meanwhile, over on Robert Stanley's side, we were looking at 1 Surgical Extraction, 2 Blood Moon, 2 Anger of the Gods, 2 Abrade, 2 Seasoned Pyromancer, 3 Spell Pierce, and 3 Ravenous Trap. What do you want to do if you're Robert Stanley?
So, we've talked about this before. These 3-color decks just have very little in the way of basics, and you can just punk them sometimes with a Blood Moon. 2
basics in the Mardu deck.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'd want to bring in both Blood Moons, but maybe we just bring in one of them, and you catch them off guard. Early on, they've got to fetch up a dual land. They're interested in taking the damage from the shock land anyway, and you can just get them with this Blood Moon, and they really can't cast spells for the rest of the game. Mm-hmm. I'm not super interested in a lot of these other cards. Potentially, Spell Pierce gives you that interaction that you want on turns 1 and 2 while you're setting up your board. There's an argument made for a card like a Braid just as a cheap removal spell, but it doesn't scale well as the game goes along. If you're hitting a Ranger Captain of Eos with it, obviously they've already gotten another really good card out of the situation. You're not going to be able to kill a big Death Shadow with a card like a Braid, and it doesn't go to the face, so even if they're in a precarious position, you draw a Braid, it's not like you can burn out the opponent.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Got to tell you, I like Seasoned Pyromancer here. I think
Okay.
that's a fine way to hold down the battlefield, especially facing down an army of Death Shadows. It buys you a ton of time, which may be exactly what you need as these at Phoenix decks. So I'm curious if Robert Stanley's going to go to that card in this matchup.
Yeah, I could see that. Just, you play it on turns 3, 4, or 5. You block with some of the tokens. You block with that thing. You exile it from the graveyard, get more tokens, do some more blocking.
And that's a lot of turns when you're facing down a singular threat, as you often are against the Death Shadow deck. So we'll have to see if that's one of the ads for Robert Stanley here. If you're jonesing to play with one of these new cool decks, either the Mardu Death Shadow or the revised Is It Phoenix with the addition of Aria of Flame, you know the spot to do it. Head on over to Game Night. Ask your local store if they're running SCG game nights. Every week in July, you'll be able to get that exclusive Down Undead token and sleeve at Star City Games Game Night. Head to go.starcitygames.com/game night. You'll get some more information. Craig and I have been schooled. Down Undead is referencing the Down Under because there is a koala on this token.
There's 2 koalas, and are they sharing a kimono here?
Well, when we see the full version, they're running from like a spirit, right? There you go.
Well, it's a
spirit koala.
A zombie koala, I would assume.
Okay.
It's undead, so it'd be a zombie koala.
Sure. I don't know what
I don't
goes
understand
on.
why they're sharing the same clothes.
It's just what koalas do.
And is that a mallet they have with them?
Yeah, giant mallet. You know, this is a pretty typical depiction of the Down Under as I understand it in this mythical world.
When I think of Australia, this is basically the picture that comes to my head.
Absolutely. Giant mallets, koalas, sometimes sharing clothing, and zombies. That's all I think about. If your thoughts are the same, you can head over to go.starcitygames.com/creature collection as well. There you'll be able to get the playmat version of this Down Undead artwork.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to pick up one of those.
I already did. Before I even left the venue yesterday, I had it in my bag. Actually slept covered in Down Undead playmats. It was very comfortable.
You're getting a little silly on me over there, aren't you?
It's been a long day, Craig. I don't really know where I am anymore. I'm just going to keep saying words, hope they make sense. Meanwhile, in our other matchups, Jonathan Hobbs up a game against Cat Light. Kazu Negri up a game against Dominic Harvey. So splitting the matches here. Very tight competition between these two very experienced teams. All of these players been around the SCG Tour plenty now. Spoke to Dom Harvey before the quarterfinals started, asked him how he was feeling on the prospect of another season chasing around the SCG Tour. He's excited to put up a big result right off the bat. Definitely wants to close this season after starting last season, spending a lot of the season on top of that leaderboard.
Yep. Yeah, he kind of got chased down late in the first half of the year.
He absolutely did. And if you talk to him, he said the grind got to him a little bit, was a little bit worn down when the end of the season came. But back here at the start of season 2 with some renewed vigor. Meanwhile, Bertarioni going to lead on Mishra's Bauble. Godless Shrine, Thoughtseize, plenty of damage to himself thus far. And taking a peek at what his opponent's working with. There you see that Seasoned Pyromancer as we suspected, and there you see Blood Moon as well.
Yep.
So 2 cards we kind of had our eyes on. Again, this hand just very good amount of redundancy. If it's lacking one thing, it's kind of like multiple cheap threats. So I think you can make an argument for Thing in the Ice here. Mm-hmm. But we'll have to see what Bertarioni feels like he can deal with out of this as a Phoenix deck.
Yeah, so you see the Blood Moon. So the question is, like, can Jeremy effectively play around that once he has the knowledge of that card?
Right.
I think the answer might just be no. Like he has the opportunity to take it. He might just have to take it here.
Yeah, led Godless Shrine, so that makes sense. And he is going to take the Blood Moon. The other card you can make a case for is Serum Visions with only 1 land in hand.
Yep.
But that's a risky take, I think.
Yeah, with these decks being so redundant.
Right.
You know, if he peels another land, he's fine just, cycling a bunch of cards for 2 mana. And if he just draws another cantrip, you feel like a dummy for taking the Serum Visions.
Serum Visions is going to be the play here. Land was left on top, Thoughtscour put on the bottom. 2 Lightning Bolts over the last 2 draws for Robert Stanley, so the texture of his hand has changed quite a bit. Now a removal-rich hand. And that's one of the problems with playing against these decks. Like, Bertarioni could be in the spot and be like, okay, Dreadhorde Arcanist time.
Coast is clear.
And Stanley's like, I have Lightning Bolts for days. Go ahead and play Arcanist. Bertarioni going to go get Blood Crypt here. It's Thoughtseize again. And the jig is up.
Yeah, a much harder decision this time, I think. There's 2 Lightning Bolts. Do you really want to take one of those? Probably not. But then there's the argument of, like, if you don't have much pressure, he really has to deal himself a lot of damage to get that pressure, and then he's worried about those 2 Lightning Bolts.
Sure thing.
There's 2 Mana Morphos. Do you want to take the 2 Mana Morphos? I don't know. That doesn't do a whole lot.
Yeah, I think this matchup just doing a good job illustrating why discard has become less prevalent.
Yeah. I mean, the Thing in the Ice is the threat in this hand. You're like, maybe I want to take the Thing in the Ice, but I feel like the Mardu Death Shadow deck has a lot of answers for a card like that.
It's going to be Lightning Bolt as the take. You can understand why.
Yeah.
Doing a lot of damage to himself is Bertarioni.
Oh.
Here's Surgical Extraction. Okay.
Using Surgical as an extra discard spell here.
Yeah, it's a little nice.
And he's gotten himself down to 9 right away.
The other crucial thing, again, a shuffle effect when he knows the top card was left, and we know it was the second land for Robert Stanley. So I actually like this play quite a bit here.
Well, and I wouldn't be surprised if he deploys a Death Shadow here as well.
Could be. There it is, Death Shadow.
Yeah, that was a great turn.
And now the clock is ticking. Wow, beautiful turn there from Bertarioni. And you're starting to see the power of this Death Shadow deck. Rips it off the top, does Robert Stanley, slams the island onto the battlefield. Thing in the Ice. coming on down. We know that's going to flip quickly here. Bertarioni takes a draw for the turn. 2 Manamorphos in hand for Robert Stanley.
Yeah, Manamorphos is kind of the dream that gets this deck churning. It's the free spell that also cantrips. And, you're looking to flip Thing in the Ice. You're looking to deploy the Phoenix as fast as possible. You want all the Manamorphoses in the world.
That was a big draw. Big draw from Robert Stanley. This game was basically over. I mean, okay, now it was definitely over if he didn't find that land. Ranger Captain of Eos adding to the Death Shadow count. Here comes that first Death Shadow. Going to beat in 5 points of damage. Stanley falling to 15.
Yeah, and this gets super interesting. So if the Thing in the Ice flips this turn.
Yeah, and there you go. The immediate cash in on that Ranger Captain. I agree. Unsurprisingly, apparently I just love sacrificing Ranger Captains more than anything on the planet.
Well, and so what I was saying is Jeremy's in this spot where he almost can't use one of his lands anymore. He really doesn't want to fall to 7 life and just die to a one-shot from a flipped Thing in the Ice.
Great point. Great point. Let's see how he's going to approach this turn. Five more points of damage headed Robert's way. Going to fall to 10. 2 more Death Shadow. Bertarioni says, I'm all in. And now Robert Stanley going to get to do his thing. Starting off, Manamorphos. 3 counters left on that Thing in the Ice.
And he's about to look at so many cards. I wouldn't be surprised if he found a Phoenix here and closed out this game.
Here's second Manamorphos. Down to 2 counters on Thing in the Ice. Takes a draw. Spell Pierce land.
Kind of awkward.
Not great. Not great.
Still has a Faithless Looting. And the conservative route is to Spell Pierce your own Faithless
Looting. I think you got to consider it here, because if you miss, GG.
The aggressive route is a Faithless Looting, look at the top 2, and hope you find a card to just win the game on the spot.
Yeah. Which one do you do? It's a tough question.
Yeah,
right?
That's actually a really tough call. I might just play to win the game right here.
It's a tough call. It's real hard. And I think a lot of it depends on, can you beat this kind of draw if you don't win the game this turn? If you have to go to another turn, are you going to be able to find your win? I don't know. I think it depends a lot on what you're able to do on the next turn with that Faithless Looting.
Well, so he would have to find another spell that he can cast this turn if he lets the Faithless Looting resolve. Otherwise, he just dies next turn to these Death Shadows.
He's letting it resolve. He found his Serum Visions.
All right.
Got there. Scary spot. Robert Stanley playing a little aggressive. Going to bounce those Death Shadows back to hand. Takes the draw from the Serum Visions. Going to get to set up the rest of the library.
Oh, and he's going to look at a million cards again.
Yeah. Finale, one of the finds.
It is interesting. So he only has 3 lands.
Mm-hmm.
Often when you finale, you want to
hit
a Manamorphos to leave yourself with mana to keep going, quote unquote, going through the turn, casting spells.
Yeah.
So the best finales usually are like Manamorphos, Faithless Looting. And with only 3 lands, that's not an option. It looks like he puts 2 on the bottom.
Bottom's both, yeah. Going to swing in for 7. That means as the lands sit now, only 2 Death Shadows going to rejoin the party on this next turn. But they're big ones, 12/12s. Yeah, there's Death Shadow number 1. That's it, though. Just 1 Death Shadow.
So the Pyromancer, yep, haven't forgotten about that one.
Yeah, and you see how immediate impact for the Pyromancer here. Not only is it able to hold the Death Shadow at bay, but it gets wide when your opponent is down to a very low life total. Maybe this is one of the key cards in the matchup, now that I think about it, because this is a very common situation where your opponent finds themselves at a very precarious life total. And Pyromancer going to evade all those blockers, dodge spot removal. Force Bertarioni to have an answer on his next turn.
Are they elementals? Is that what it makes?
It does make elementals. 1/1 red elemental tokens. Ross Merriam's on the battlefield there. Here's a Path to Exile.
Yeah, and
it's going to be Seasoned Pyromancer as the target.
So I like this. I like this line. You don't want that, Seasoned Pyromancer in the graveyard to be flashback, quote unquote, to make some more tokens.
Agreed.
You force your opponent to chump block. You deploy your 2 Death Shadows.
Mm-hmm.
You've got 2 blockers for the next turn.
Yeah, sounds good to me. And that is how Bertarioni is going to play the turn.
Yeah, great line there from him. Only playing 1 Death Shadow the last turn. It actually also left him, that Path to Exile up in case a Phoenix hit the board.
Manamorphose going to be cast by Robert Stanley. Didn't quite see what the draw was there. Blood Moon, maybe?
Yeah, it looks like another Blood Moon in his hand, which is kind of interesting. It would lock his opponent out of the game, but the Death Shadows are just, too much going on right now.
Well, we're going to cast a Faithless Looting from the graveyard instead. I think one of the finds was Aria of Flame. That's not doing much here.
Yeah.
All of those attackers representing lethal on Bertarioni's side right now.
Well, the Aria would shrink them to be real small again.
That's true.
There is that Horizon land which can start chipping away at Jeremy's life total again.
I don't know if he has the mana source to do that. Does he have an additional land in hand?
Yeah, so I'm not sure about all the cards in his hand. It's just interesting the way that would change
No,
the
you're
game
right.
state.
And that's what we're going to see, actually. Here's a mountain, and here's Aria of Flame. Incredible. That's going to make those Death Shadows 2/2s.
So he can force a chump block. Oh, no, you got to attack and force the chump block, I think.
Well,
what are you thinking, Brian? Because
it's not a forced chump block anymore because he gains the 10 life. So he can just let it go.
Sure, yeah, of course.
Yeah, you can't attack him.
No, you're 100% right.
Look, I understand why you're confused. This is some unintuitive magic we're seeing right now.
I'm just like, I know that they're smaller, but then I don't know that he gained all this life.
I understand. Weird things happening. There's an Inquisition of Kozilek taking out that Blood Moon. Actually, an incredibly important get there. That would have just stopped Bertarioni from playing this game.
What a ridiculous game. The back and forth here.
Yeah, and Giver of Ruin is going to be the next play. And Unearth.
Oh, wow.
Last card in hand for Bertarioni. We know what that's doing. That's going to go get Ranger Captain. That's going to find the 4th and final Death Shadow. These are tiny little Death Shadows, but they could find a way real quick. Although, Aria Flame on the battlefield, we know what this card can do.
Yep.
It could wrap this up real quickly for Robert Stanley.
A couple of cantrips or a finale, and the Aria is going to close out this game.
Yeah, both players hell-bent right now. This is a wild game. Very back and forth, tons of interesting decisions. And again, there's going to be questions about this Ranger Captain of Eos. Ranger Captain, a cool card. Requires a lot of thought.
So many decisions with it,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
absolutely. Well, now we are the pre-attack phase. Jeremy thinking about his options. Just going to pass the turn back to Robert. Robert takes a draw here. Cantrips are insane.
Well, certain ones are kind of funny, right? Like if he draws a Faithless Looting.
Not insane.
Not insane.
Much less insane. And again, it's the one-shot problem, right? You don't want to give these Death Shadow multiple pumps. It's like we're tapping 4 mana. That says Phoenix to me.
Oh, this has been such a good game.
It is going to be a Phoenix. And now Stanley's going to have to do a lot of math to figure out if an attack makes sense here.
Yeah, it's super awkward because Stanley, the way the board looks, you could just never attack again for the rest of the game unless it actually kills your opponent.
I think that's right. We know 4th copy of Death Shadow in Bertarioni's hand. Man, how good would a second Aria Flame be?
That would be nuts.
This is a tough spot for Robert Stanley to navigate. Looks like he's getting ready to pass. He is going to pass. Turn goes back to Bertarioni. Death Shadow in hand, takes a draw.
And I like the careful play out of both of these players. On Jeremy's last turn, he thought a while before passing the turn. He was like, hey, is there a chance I can attack here? The answer is no, but I appreciate him taking the time to really think about it, figure it out. He was probably also thinking about his Ranger Captain, and then exact same thing on the next turn. Deploys the Phoenix, and then really takes his time considering whether or not he should be attacking with it.
Really interesting here. Bertarioni just cast Mishra's Bauble. Got to look at the top card of Stanley's deck. That information critical with Ranger Captain on the battlefield. And we're going to start to look for some attacks here. Death Shadow. I'm assuming given protection from blue.
Yep.
Stanley's going to line up a double block.
Got a double block because Jeremy could just take a damage from his Horizon land here if he wanted to.
Not going to. Just going to trade. Just trading either way, so kind of irrelevant. Here is that backup Death Shadow.
And we see how good those Horizon lands are in this deck. Jeremy has the ability to use his life total as that resource, pinging himself when he wants to.
On upkeep. Oh, this is critical. Jeremy missed his Bauble trigger. Did not draw the card from Mishra's Bauble.
And I think he must have looked at a really good one from the Bauble. Oh, it doesn't matter.
Just going to jam there.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Able to grow the Death Shadows to 5/5s.
Look, you still want to cross your T's, dot your I's. You don't want to miss that Mishra's Bauble trigger in a key spot. But, yes, did not matter. Had the lethal attack from the Death Shadow. And now this match tied at 1 game apiece. Man, that was an incredible game.
Just great magic from both sides. A lot of good decisions, a lot of complex decisions.
Yeah.
And these players are just really giving us a show here.
That was a real mind melter, and we saw it as we stumbled over the Aria Death Shadow back and forth. Like, it was just so unintuitive how life totals were affecting everything on the battlefield, what was lethal, what wasn't. Complicated battlefields this Mardu Death Shadow deck gets up to. Well, you see on your screen now, every single one of these matches tied at 1 game apiece. Incredibly tense situation for all of our competitors down in the feature match area. As we mentioned, huge stakes for this first tournament.
So at the end of day 1, Jeremy came up to me and he asked me what I thought of his deck. And I think my answer came across a little bit dismissive. Ultimately, at the end of day 1, or just for this event in general, my attitude was just like, if you're not playing Hogak, what are you really doing?
Mm-hmm.
And that type of answer is not to say that this deck isn't very good and I have a lot of things going for it. I've said it several times already. I really like the polish on this deck. The numbers all make sense. It doesn't have too much fluff going on in it. I like the disruption. I like the removal suite that he has, and then I like the ability to close out the game really quick as well.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Ranger Captain Abios, a card I pegged for usage with Death Shadow very early on. Happy to see it finally come to fruition. We saw some Esper Death Shadow decks starting to make the rounds on Magic Online. For my taste, they were a little too reliant on the graveyard. That was my big objection to them, given the state of the metagame. This Mardu Death Shadow deck, no such problems. Really not super reliant on the graveyard at all, and able to generate a ton of value out of nowhere. See, players look honestly pretty relaxed given the stakes of this tournament. These players all know each other, as we mentioned. All friends, joking a little bit, smiling, having a good time.
I mean, they're really playing impressive Magic under the top 8 lights here.
Yeah. Players looking at their opening 7s. You see a satisfied nod from Robert Stanley. And he snaps to represent the snap keep.
Love it when the personality comes across.
Absolutely. Have our first result from another table. It looks like the team of Masteki, Koval, and Mages taking down Baker, Rogers, and Azelos. Masteki, Koval, Mages advancing to our semifinals. The first team to make their way to that part of the bracket.
Team Urza Daddy.
Absolutely. Looks like we were ready to go. Down in our future match area. Just turn 1 tap land for the Izzet Phoenix deck. Bertarioni going to play on tap land, as the Mardu Death Shadow deck is wont to do. Cycling Street Wraith. It's funny how often the play in this matchup has been to surgical the lightning bolts. We've seen it multiple times now. And I think it's maybe just like a core strategic concept of this matchup, to be honest with you. The more I see it, every single one of these games is so problematic from the Mardu Death Shadow side if lightning bolt remains in the deck.
I agree. Yep.
And look at this, Inquisition of Kozilek on your lightning bolt. That is the card that Bertarioni is hard targeting. Would not surprise me at all if these just get surgical extraction very soon. And that's crazy, because obviously the way surgical extraction wormed its way into main decks, it was as a response to Phoenix, specifically to target Arc-like Phoenix. Bertarioni's deck, though, obviously with other answers to that card.
Well, and we've seen this in Modern for a long time, where if you have a bunch of discard effects in your deck, or if you just get to look at your opponent's hand in some way, you can use those surgical extractions as extra discard spells when there's a copy in the hand and the graveyard.
Sure.
Copy of a card for your opponent.
Absolutely.
And again, there's that Blood Moon. I'm sure it's a scary card. I wouldn't be surprised if Jeremy has a Dreadhorde Arcanist or another discard spell to try to make sure this Blood Moon doesn't hit the table.
Yeah, I think I saw a Thoughtseize in hand for Jeremy. Would expect that to be the play on the next turn, unless there's a bunch of basics and fetch lands in his hand presently.
But even then, like, if a Blood Moon hits the table, he's never going to be able to deploy
multiple spells, basically, and Ranger Captain's just cut off. He doesn't have access to it anymore.
Never Ranger Captain. He can't manage his life total the way that he wants to with shock lands and fetch lands and horizon lands. He can never cycle a horizon land to draw more cards. I mean, that's a card that I think he just wants to keep off of the board at all costs.
Yeah, I think Blood Moon's a real problem for this deck. I think that's a good assessment.
Yeah, looking at these games and thinking about this more, I said maybe you bring in one of them. No, it's probably just both of them.
Yep, I agree with you. And, you know, we've been honest about this process throughout. We're just learning this Mardu Death Shadow deck on the fly. We're learning a lot of surprising things about it, what it's capable of, and how to play against it as well. Here's a fetch land from Bertarioni. Untapped Godless Shrine, going to fall down to 12 life. There is that Thoughtseize I thought I spied.
Yeah, an important one.
Yeah.
And did he take the Aria Flame? Is that what just happened?
Sure, looks like it. So I'm assuming another discard spell is coming. That's the only thing that makes sense, right?
Well, his opponent doesn't have another land right now, correct?
Okay, but you're going to bet your entire match on that decision?
Yeah, I'm just...
I mean, look, Aria Flame's a problem too. Let's not deny that. But that decision was made fairly quickly. I mean, that seems like a difficult decision if you're really in the grinder here.
Yeah, the most expected line here is another discard spell.
Surgical Extraction. Jeremy's going to fall to 8. Looks like the target was Aria Flame.
Yeah, and he just flashed the land on top of the deck to his teammates. This is another time, third time we've seen it. You've cast Serum Visions, we're going to shuffle your deck.
Yeah. A lot of small little interactions coming up here. No more Aria problem. That was a big problem. Can't deny that.
I feel like Jeremy's still in a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't, if he doesn't have another discard spell here.
Here's Death Shadow. Okay. We're just sweating this one out. That Death Shadow presently a 5/5. Stanley does not draw the land. Does have Magmatic Sinkhole in hand, I believe, but not yet fueled up.
And this is just so interesting. Part of Jeremy's plan, I think, is just like, hey, if you tap out for a Blood Moon here, you're locking yourself out of blue unless you top deck an island.
Sure.
So it's like, all right, we'll just play this game where I have a big Death Shadow on the board. Let's do this.
Yeah. Jeremy kind of went for it here, and I like it. I like it. It was aggressive. The more I think about it, though, yeah, he's basically saying you gotta hit your island here. And obviously, there's multiple outs. There's fetch lands, but took a really hard, aggressive line. We'll see if he can use it.
And it looks like he found that basic island that he's looking for.
He did.
Now the question is like, hey, do I get this thing in the ice on the board? Like, is there a way that I can put enough cards in my graveyard this turn to sinkhole the opponent's Death Shadow?
Yeah, I think in the absence of Thought Scour, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it had to be Faithless Looting, or now it has to be Thought Scour, or Manamorphose.
Manamorphose, fine. One of the best counters to Blood Moon is just never give your opponent a window where they can take a turn off and play it.
Yeah, and that's definitely what's happening here.
Seasoned Pyromancer.
That's a great one.
Yeah, I agree. Especially if this Death Shadow doesn't have friends with it.
Yeah, the single Death Shadow, you'll block that thing for days.
There is that basic island. Turn going to head back to Jeremy. Is that the basic swamp in his hand?
I'm not sure if it was.
Not quite sure either. Death Shadow does have a friend. It's Dreadhorde Arcanist.
Well, and this was a big turn because he was actually able to grow the Death Shadow.
Yep, out of Magmatic Sinkhole range.
Yep, out of the Sinkhole range.
Very important. And now Dreadhorde Arcanist is going to try and unlock that graveyard. What's going to be the play from Robert Stanley? Fetch is step one. Got another result from one of our other tables. The team of Satterfield, Horton, and Kelly going to advance on to our semifinals. They took down Luong, Bagames, and McVitie. That means it's Bestecki's team versus Satterfield's team in our first semifinal.
Oh, this is a rough one.
Yeah, tough turn here. It is going to be Blood Moon. Didn't fetch for another island. Comfortable playing with only one blue here.
Well, I think he wanted to fetch with that so that he could cast the Sinkhole this turn, right? Like, I really don't want to let this Arcanist just start casting free spells when I've locked my opponent out of all of their colored mana.
Yeah, that would have been the 5th card in the graveyard. Does cost you a point of life. That's a consideration. But you're right. That would have gotten away from the Dreadhorde Arcanist. And the graveyard would have been locked up. And here's another Thoughtseize.
Yeah, I think if you Sinkhole the Arcanist, and then the next turn you deploy the Pyromancer and have just chump blockers for days.
I agree.
That's a more effective line moving through this game.
I agree with you. I think this was a mistake from Stanley. Young Pyromancer, seasoned Pyromancer. This is the older Pyromancer headed to the bin now. Well, now we can sinkhole if we want. The cost you your Pyromancer, though. Maybe just waiting a turn here makes more sense. Gonna take some more damage is Stanley. Yeah, I think this game has kind of gone very wrong off that decision because you still have Seasoned Pyromancer in hand at this point.
Yep.
If you had killed the Arcanist, and then you just have chump blockers for that Death Shadow. Unless Bertarioni does have the basic Swamp in hand along with some backup, I love your position from there.
Sure, yeah. And I think things are bad enough that you can't consider, hey, does my opponent have the basic? Mm-hmm. You just have to make the best plays for if your opponent can't do anything at all.
Look, this is a high-pressure situation. It's tough to see it all. But you got to wonder if Stanley's going to regret this one when all is said and done. Here's Thing in the Ice. Going to get 4 counters on it.
5 counters, 4 counters, kind of the same thing.
It honestly might be in this spot.
Yeah, it's just chump blocking, right? Ooh, that's an interesting one.
Faithless Looting.
Yep, one of the few cards he can cast.
Absolutely, yeah.
And he's interested in putting cards into his graveyard because of the Arcanist.
For a Dreadhorde Arcanist, sure. Yeah, pretty good draw there from Bertarioni. It's like Path to Exile in the bin. Oh, boy. Well, here's that sinkhole, finally. It's going to get fired off. We are going to get a chump block here.
There's still a lot of interesting draws. The game's definitely not completely over.
I agree with you.
I'm going to flash back this Faithless Looting.
I think so. That is going to be the play. Looks like we found a Street Wraith and a land. Going to pitch a couple lands, pass the turn back to Robert Stanley. Takes a draw. Looks like Serum Vision's Thought Scour only gets to cast one of them. Those two hit the bin, takes the draw. It's a second copy of Blood Moon. That is going to do it. Robert Stanley extends the hand, and you just have to wonder if there was a missed opportunity there, not cashing in that fetch land.
But also, props to Jeremy. He played that game really well.
Absolutely. Take nothing away from Jeremy. Beautifully played game.
From the start, that Blood Moon is just terrifying, right? Where you're like, if that hits the board, I might not resolve another spell for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
And he was just like, no, like I can play this game in a way where I get threats on the board. My opponent's not going to have time to cast that spell.
Sure.
And if he takes the turn off to cast it, he's getting punished for the maximum. And that's the way the game played out.
No, you're exactly right. Props to Bertarioni for finding the aggressive line, taking it, and maybe stealing a game there from Robert Stanley. Now it all comes down to one final game of Magic for this quarterfinals. It's going to be Jonathan Hobbs against Cat Light. Humans versus Is It Phoenix for all the marbles in this match. Looks like players are about ready to go. Hobbs going to lead on turn 1 land and Ether Vial. Fine start from the Humans player here. On the play as well. Very important in all modern matchups. This one in particular.
Yeah, in matchups like this, this is how the Humans deck plays against unfair decks, right? They also get to cheat on mana with their Ether Vial, and they're just going to get on the board so fast with their disruption and pressure that they can close out the game.
Cat just going to lead on fetch land past the turn.
And I like that. The think for 15, 20 seconds, play a land, go.
Every decision matters here. It's Kitesail Freebooter from Jonathan Hobbs, a fine start against the Is It Phoenix deck.
And the jig is up.
Yeah. Looks like Cat going to respond. Cracks that fetch land.
Oop.
Lightning Bolt down. going to grab Basic Mountain. Fire that off. Hobbs does get a look. Flame Slash, Sleight of Hand, Thing in the Ice, 2 lands, Faithless Looting. That's a nice hand.
Yeah, this is a great hand. It's got another removal spell, and it's not just a removal spell. It's a 4 damage removal spell.
Big removal spell.
If she has to wait a turn or two, she's still going to be able to get a creature that's grown with a couple of counters on it. It has the threat. In Thing in the Ice, it has lots of cantrips, so it's got that velocity to churn through the deck that we like to see. It's a great mix of cards.
Hobbs says, I sure wish I could take that Flame Slash. Not going to happen, though. And here is Thing in the Ice, the problem card in this matchup for sure for this Humans deck. Hobbs able to use that Ether Vial on Cat's turn. Going to go ahead and deploy Noble Hierarch. I also have a result from our third match. The team of Fear, Shrout, and Barich takes down Smith, Johnson, and Nines. They're going to move on to our semifinals. Ready to take on the winner of the match you're watching now.
Shrout the Burn Daddy.
Absolutely.
Getting it done. So this Militia Bugler, it's real good in this situation, but it's one of those cards I've been wondering if it just shouldn't be in the sideboard of the Humans deck anymore.
There's always been a debate over Militia Bugler, and it's been a heated one. People with varying opinions on how good this card actually is. I think like everything else in Modern, it's probably metagame dependent. What's your take on why it doesn't fit right now?
So I think you just need to dedicate so many sideboard cards to combating graveyards right now that you can't justify having a more vanilla-ish card in your sideboard.
Too low impact, basically.
That's part of it, but if you want to play, I think if this is the metagame moving forward, you have to beat Hogak. I want to show up with some number of jailers and the full complement of Leylines.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want to attack them from both routes and just really clobber them.
Sure.
And once you do that, you're left with, you just use 6 of your sideboard slots, maybe 7. So you're left with 8 or 9. You want things that actually do stuff in matchups, and Militia Bugler is not that card. It's a card that finds the other cards that do things in matchups.
Sure.
And I just don't know if you have the room for that in your sideboard anymore.
What about the argument that's more virtual copies of Yixlid Jailer?
It is, but it's slow getting there.
It absolutely is. So Flame Slash on Thalia was the play from Catlight. Hobbs, though, with a nice play here. It's Reflector Mage. That's going to go ahead and return Thing in the Ice to hand, prevent it from coming down on Cat's next turn. Militia Bugler going to rumble into the red zone, 3 points of damage, headed Cat's way after the Exalted trigger.
And this is one of the nightmare situations when you play against the Humans deck. It's like, hey, this is my only threat. This is how I have to interact with the board. It gets sent back to the hand with Reflector Mage, and you know that they already have another virtual copy of Reflector Mage in their hand to send it back to the grip again.
Yep. A Phantasmal Image, of course, at the ready to copy that Reflector Mage if it needs to. It's worth noting that in post-board games, Cat almost certainly has access to Anger of the Gods. Definitely a card that Jonathan Hobbs has to be fearing. But here comes just an Arclight Phoenix. It's going to make its way onto the battlefield. Is it going to attack? Looks like no. Here's Phantasmal Image. That's going to copy Militia Bugler because there's a second Phantasmal Image in Jonathan Hobbs' hand.
Well, and, finding a pump effect, an anthem effect here would just be huge.
There you go.
It is. And this allows all of these 2/3s to just push through this Arclight Phoenix and to really pressure the opponent.
Absolutely. An incredible amount of damage is going to be headed Cat's way. Also protection from Anger of the Gods, let's keep in mind.
Yep.
Hobbs going to take his draw, leaving that Ether Vial on 2. Step 1, we're going to tap this Noble Hierarch. Alongside Ziggurat. It's Meddling Mage time. We'll get a report on exactly what that's naming. Thing in the Ice is the name, of course. And now here's Thalio's Lieutenant, and that's going to pump this battlefield. And things are starting to look grim for Catlight. Someone flings an army of dice across the table.
I like that. Dice for everyone!
Yeah, well, 5 creatures receiving a buff here from Thalio's Lieutenant. And all these creatures going to head into the red zone. Catlight facing 9 points of damage headed her way if she chooses not to block.
So I think you're very incentivized to block here.
I think so, too.
You're off the Thing in the Ice plan, barring a lightning bolt. So you're going to have to cast a bunch of spells next turn in order to do something effective in this matchup. Oh, mama.
And there's a follow-up. Second Thalio's Lieutenant. Everything is getting bigger.
And someone just threw more
dice flung around the battlefield.
It looks like Art Like Phoenix picked up a few
it wishes.
in the carnage there.
It wishes it did. So Phoenix just going to head to the graveyard. 8 damage headed Cat's way. Cat takes a draw, needs something incredible here to get out of this situation. A fantastic draw from this Humans deck.
Well, and now the Meddling Mage is even out of Lightning Bolt range. It has to be like a magmatic sinkhole or something similar to get it off the board in order to get Thing in the Ice down, and then you got to cast all the cantrips to flip it this turn.
Yeah, needing a true miracle here. Here's Opt. Oh, I think we looked at 2 there from an Opt. I think we resolved that as sleight of hand. It doesn't matter. Cat's going to go ahead. We would have rewound, but the match was effectively over. And the team of Harvey, Hobbs, Bertarioni, they try and figure out the handshake game. They've eventually there's some kind of hug going on. Nothing good is being done right now.
Face
Cut from this. I can't watch it anymore. It's literally killing me. It's a show of good sportsmanship. Players